Tonight, it is on. Donald Trump and Joe Biden hammering each other as both men visit Iowa. We've got the highlights, the lowlights, and expert analysis. Then Democrats continuing to fight the good fight over the Mueller report. A former federal prosecutor will weigh in on where things stand and where he says they're headed. Also, it looks like Congress actually can walk and chew gum at the same time. The House Judiciary Committee spending a ton of time on the Mueller report, but it also has started investigating the biggest tech companies in the nation. We'll show you what they're concerned about and why you should also be concerned. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in for Richard French once again. Donald Trump and Joe Biden both visiting Iowa today. Even before he left the White House, the president teeing off on the former vice president.
Joe Biden is a dummy. Joe Biden thought China was not a competitor. China made $500 billion over a short period of time against Obama, Biden, and for many, many years, in all fairness to them. China ate our country alive during Obama and Biden. They ate us alive. And then Biden has some kind of a relationship financially, or his son, with China. Tell me about that.
Tell us how you really feel. Just a couple of hours after that, Biden responded.
Look, I believe that the president is literally an existential threat to America for three reasons. One, he is a genuine threat to our core values. And if you wondered about that, remember what happened in Charlottesville. I never thought I'd see that happen in my lifetime again. And what happened? When he was asked to comment on it, he said, quote, "There were very fine people in both groups." And he's a threat to our standing in the world, embracing dictators and thugs, from Putin to Kim Jong-un, calling them my friends, sending love while he's poking his finger in the eye of our allies. The fact of the matter is that 4 years of Donald Trump will be viewed as an aberration in American history. 8 years will fundamentally change who we are as a nation and how we're viewed around the world. I think there's a genuine threat to American democracy.
With both of them in Iowa, we also have some new numbers out of Iowa. Joe Biden remains in the lead in the Democratic primary, but only by 8 points ahead of the caucus. Bernie Sanders, Liz Warren, Pete Buttigieg in a virtual tie for second. Democratic strategist Stephen Cobb is former Deputy Attorney General of Virginia. He was also an Obama appointee in the Commerce Department. Stephen, Joe Biden is going after President Trump in Iowa today, accusing him of failing the basic standard to be president, hitting him on putting himself before the nation, North Korea, farmers, China, tariffs, healthcare, and a lot more. We'll leave it to individual viewers to decide how effective the attack was. Why do you think Biden is doing this and doing this now?
Well, there is no doubt that right now that Vice President Biden, Freudian slip, is a Democratic frontrunner, and so he is really setting the standard for what that conversation is going to be, not just in Iowa, but in primary states across the country. And so a part of that is going to be a level of attack on the president and the shortcomings of the administration thus far, coupled with what the former vice president's vision for the future is.
Well, I got to ask about the context of this all, because he took some heat last week, Biden did, both on his reversal on the Hyde Amendment related to abortion and also when it came to his climate change proposals, which apparently portions of which may have been lifted from some third parties. This feels to me like a sign of weakness. He's feeling heat among the Democrats, so he decides to go after the president.
Well, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. Obviously, protecting a woman's right to choose and making sure that the sustainability of our environment are priorities and are going to be things that the Democratic primary electorate is going to look at all the candidates and see where they stand on those issues. But, you know, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so there's going to be putting forth substantive policy proposals on the one hand, but also making sure that the differences with the current administration are pronounced and clear.
I got to push back on that a little bit, though, because it's not really about the policies over the last week for Vice President Biden. It was about the politics of it all. He found himself in a position on the Hyde Amendment that seemed out of step with the party, and he flip-flopped himself. The climate change stuff wasn't so much about climate change as much as about the allegations of plagiarism and what brought down his 88 campaign.
You know, well, I think it's fair to ask those continuing questions, particularly as it pertains to the former vice president's position on the Hyde Amendment, and it is something that has lacked a certain level of clarity. And I think he's going to keep getting pushed, not just from the Democratic primary electorate, but from other members of Congress and and across the country to make sure that that position is really clear. As far as it goes to the environmental policy, that I'm not sure there's really an excuse, and they need to make sure they have it together and better going forward.
And I think both of those answers are fine, and they certainly explain why the vice president's campaign did what it did. But now using that as the context for his attacks on Trump today, this feels like changing the subject.
Well, the subject's always going to be continually evolving, and no one's better at changing the subject than the president. Whether, every day there's 12 new tweets on, 15 different subjects, which are going to result in the commenting and the focus on the nature of those statements. And so, with the vice president's hit and attacks on the president are going to be consistent, as I think that many of the primary field will be as well.
The vice president speaking today in Iowa. The president will also be in Iowa. And we just got a poll out of Iowa where Biden's in the lead, but there's a three-way tie for second, about 10 points behind Biden. You got Sanders, Warren, and Buttigieg. Sanders, Warren, and Buttigieg talk about the president, but not that much, and then they move on to policy prescriptions. So if Biden is sort of leading the field here and focusing on President Trump, why isn't everybody else in the field doing the same thing?
Well, it's interesting. Well, I think at a certain point for lesser-known candidates, they have to work a little bit harder to define who they are, both as a matter of policy and as a matter of vision. The former vice president has that familiarity with the electorate, which allows him a little bit more leeway in kind of how he directs his campaign and the rhetoric associated with it. But right now, Iowa is a wide open field, and I think there's 10 candidates or so who you could catch fire depending on fundraising, depending on the debates, depending on policy. It's really still wide open right now, even though the former vice president is still in the commanding pole position.
Totally agree with you, Stephen. And that leads to, I think, a question that a lot of Democrats have, which is on paper, Joe Biden is a terrific candidate. He's the vice president for Barack Obama. He's a moderate. He plays in the Midwest and can theoretically take on Trump in a way that maybe Hillary Clinton couldn't in 2016. So he's got all that going for him, but it's the reality of whether he's up for the challenge of the campaign and of governing, and things like we've seen over the last week, or of him maybe not being as involved. He wasn't in Iowa this weekend, or he wasn't in California as other candidates were. What's your take on his performance? We know, again, on paper, he's a terrific candidate, but do you think he's actually got the energy and the strength to back that up on the campaign trail?
Well, listen, I don't think anyone should underestimate Biden's commitment and strength and focus on the campaign trail. But one of the things that the 2016 cycle taught us is not to read too much into these early polling numbers or early fundraising numbers. If you remember at this point in 2016, President Trump wasn't even in the conversation. The focus was on Jeb Bush. Can Jeb Bush run the table? He was the favorite. He had the money. He had the institutional support, and everything got turned upside down. And so it's important that we keep an open mind and really see how this whole process opens up.
Let me ask about the other candidates. If you were advising a Sanders or a Warren or a Buttigieg, what would you say they should be focusing on over the next couple of weeks in Iowa and as we approach the debate?
Well, it's an interesting question because some of these early primary states, particularly Iowa and New Hampshire, have that really important retail politics side of them. So part of my advice would be to be there, be on the ground, be listening to voters as much as you are giving large speeches and telling them what your priorities are. But I think those voters, those caucus goers, those early primary voters want to see candidates on the ground, want to meet them, want to shake their hand, want to kind of get a look and make that judge on their character and their vision themselves one-to-one.
It seems like that's the top tier of the Democratic candidates, and then you get the asterisk candidates, the Yangs, the Delaney's, the de Blasios, the Ryans, the Moultons, and that's a list that honestly could keep going. What should those asterisk candidates also be looking to do between now and the debate? And is the debate really the end of their opportunity to make their case and move up from that asterisk group into the main field?
You can never really tell what is going to be the opportunity for someone to shine. Certainly, we look at these debates as an opportunity for a lesser-known candidate to make themselves heard and to speak up in a manner that might grab the attention or the inspiration of some of those primary voters. But there's other ways to do that as well. Some of that is creating a good campaign infrastructure. Some of that is building grassroots support. Some of that is building the institutional support. So there's a few different lanes that some of these candidates in those 1%, 2%, 3% range can do to help distinguish themselves. Now, I think the larger test is going to be that second debate toward the end of the summer and making sure that the people are qualifying for that and really getting their message out. If you're not in that second debate, there's going to be some problems.
Stephen Cobb is a former Deputy Attorney General in the state of Virginia. He is a Democratic strategist. Stephen, thanks for a few minutes. Appreciate the insight.
Really appreciate you having me.
And up next, we're going to pivot to the Mueller report. Democrats are not giving up. Contempt votes, hearings, and more. We'll discuss their latest offensive with a former federal prosecutor next.